version. Hempcrete is brilliant. Right, when it's done right, there is nothing like a hempcrete building in terms of flexibility, in terms of environmental management, in terms of low or zero VOR, volatile organics outgassing. Okay, next one. I don't know why I put that in. That was my first experimental cultivar variety test that I did in Canberra. I had 5 little cabinets, each one growing a different variety, and we did our first test way back in the 90s. But that's really just for my sake, I suppose. Next one. Oh, again, little happy snaps. That's Mary. She was my first chronic pain patient, did really well. I wouldn't want to be a cop that had busted Mary. She would have bitten their heads off. She was a very feisty old lady. Anyway, again, that's just a happy snap. Next one. Do you want to hear about the endocannabinoid system, or have you heard enough? Okay. The endocannabinoid system, it's defined as a complex system of neuromodulatory lipids and their associated receptors and enzymes that have an overwhelming function in the body of attaining homeostasis. Now, I really can't give you a detailed explanation of the endocannabinoid system because I don't have one. Right? It's only in the very early stages of being investigated. And most people that pontificate about it are really big-noting their state of knowledge. Like, my impression is that the endocannabinoid system, what's being discovered, is probably about 1/10 of what there is there to discover. Everyone knows about CB1 and CB2. It used to be, and do you know when I say CB1 and CB2, we're talking about receptors. Receptors are chemical, usually protein structures that sit on cells that interact with something. We have receptors all over the place. We have receptors for thyroxine. We have receptors for adrenaline. We have receptors for all these chemical messages. But the endocannabinoid system works like no other. Normally, we have, say, the thyroid gland. While we're on thyroid, it produces thyroxine, which circulates through the body and then binds to receptors and influences the metabolic rate. The endocannabinoid system is different than that. It's a retrograde control system. And the mystery of it is that it operates at the cellular or subcellular level. Now, let me try and explain. I won't go into too much science, but all our cells are made from cell membranes, which are basically lipid envelopes that contain all the cell structures. Now, anandamide, which is the primary endocannabinoid, and it's not complicated. Endo just means within the body. So it's a cannabinoid made within the body. The plants we grow are phytocannabinoid or plant cannabinoids. And the chemical relationship between endocannabinoids and phytocannabinoids are not at all. They're completely different molecules. They're in different classes of molecules, but they both happen to have a small part of them that binds to these receptors and then affects a change. The mystery of the endocannabinoid system is the anandamide. And you all familiar with anandamide as a term? No. Okay. It is the primary cannabinoid made by the body. It was named anandamide, which is an old Sanskrit word meaning bliss, because Mechoulam, the researcher that came up with it, thought when the endocannabinoid system is working perfectly, you're in a state of complete contentment and bliss. That's really quite a poetic interpretation for a scientist. Now, things like thyroxine are made in a gland. Things like adrenaline are made in a gland, and it's relatively easy to conceptualise them, and it's relatively easy to conceptualise the feedback loops. So say, for instance, your body, to prime the thing, produces a thing called TSH, or thyroid stimulating hormone. It comes out of your brain, it stimulates the thyroid, which produces thyroxine. When the level of thyroxine gets too high, it feeds back to the brain, and the brain says, oh, I've lost the thyroxine, so it turns off the TSH, and the system comes down. When it drops a bit, it goes back up. It's a classical negative feedback loop, right? And it's, even though it's complicated in biochemical terms, in conceptual terms, it's really easy to understand. The endocannabinoid system is not, because what happens is this anandamide is made out of the cell membrane itself when it's needed. And no one has the faintest idea of what the feedback loop is. How does the cell know what the cell next to it needs? right? It really is quite a mystery. And people really have simplified the system because they have simple minds. But the more you ponder about it, it appears to me to be the interface between body and mind, right? It's some form of intelligence working at the molecular level, and it's really quite fascinating. But from a practical point of view, it's this. Say you have a lifetime of eating the wrong fats and lipids, which most people are guilty of. I mean, that bloody croissant or whatever it is, that pastry might look good, but it's death to your cells. Because if you make your house out of crumbly bricks, what are you going to get? A crumbly house. But worse than that, if you don't have the right essential fatty acids in your membranes, and you only get them by years of the right dietary choices, so each brick in your cell is the right one, you can't make the anandamide. So your endocannabinoid system can't function, right? It's all very well to take cannabis medicines when you need it for different things because you have a hypo-functioning endocannabinoid system, but so much better it is that you eat right in the long term and you build up the right cellular membranes which can produce as much anandamide as you need. They can't road test for anandamide, although I'm sure they're going to try to at some stage. Do you follow what I'm saying? Right? Every time you put something in your cake hole, think about what you're doing. Right? I mean, this might, they say a moment on your lips, a lifetime on your hips. It's worse than that. Right? I mean, the hips are one thing, but each cell remembers what you ate because it's still there. Okay? So that's a take-home message. We fought really hard and long to get hemp seed legalised in this country because it makes nutritional medicine so much easier to practice. Right? Have you all looked at the analytics of hemp seed? Just to give it to you simply, more omega-3 than fish, more protein than steak, more B-group vitamins than wheat germ, more minerals than other foods. It's the whole package. Right? Sure, it's a little bit expensive now, but for what you get, I think it's about average price is about $40 a kilo. People pay that for dead cows. They certainly pay more than that for fish, right? And you don't get a fraction of the benefit. I'll ask questions or take questions in a minute. Yeah. Okay, next one. I think that's... Have you had enough about the endocannabinoid system? I'll talk more about it next year when I know a little bit more about it. But suffice to say, at the practical level, the important thing is you are what you eat, right? And, and there's no tomorrow. It has to be today, right? You know that old saying, maybe tomorrow, maybe the next day, I'll do something about this procrastination. It doesn't work like that with your health. You can ignore, you can fool yourself for ages, but you wear it and pay the price. And you don't want to. It's great to feel great, right? It's not a struggle to get out of bed. It's not, oh, Christ, I've got to go to, I've got to do this, I've got to do that. Let's do it, right? I don't want to be ridiculous about it, but it's good to feel good. And you'll only feel good if you do the right things. Okay, is there any more slides? I think that's just... Oh, right, yeah. Oh, look, yeah, okay. No, last one, I'll finish on that. Yeah, I just go, back that one. Sorry, forward. One more. Hold that. Last year, with the help of the Hemp Embassy, I ran as a Senate candidate for the Hemp Party in New South Wales. Now, I didn't think I would bother myself to engage in the political process because it's such a backwater in this country, but then I came to my senses and said, if we don't engage, they're just going to keep this issue silent and nothing will be done. So whilst I don't think we can actually change the laws by just having one senator elected, what we can do is enrich the debate. And once you're in the parliament with the microphone, they can't ignore you. So that's the idea. The policies of the Hemp Party are very, very positive, and we sum them up with the acronym Health, Environment and Employment, Manufacturing and Productivity. These aren't mere words. These are achievable objectives, right? If we have a widespread rollout of hemp seed, remember they used to give you that warm, disgusting milk when you were kids at school? Were you all old enough for that? Just imagine you get to school, here's your hemp seed brain bar, kids, and everyone eats those, and off you go, drinking non-fluoridated water. The health will improve, right? If we manage electromagnetic smog, we'll have less autoimmune disease. If we manage diet in terms of inflammatory mediators and plant-based anti-inflammatories, we'll have less cancer. Right? It's an achievable thing, and you can see massive results in a few years. It doesn't take forever to change your health. Like 3 years of good effort across the country, we'd start to see a reduction in health spending. Right? The policies of the Health Party is not to have more, we want more hospital beds, more radiation units, more cancer beds. We don't want that. We want less patients to put in them. Right? When I was a student, the health bill for this country was $10 billion a year. It's something like about $80 billion now, and we're getting worse health outcomes. Right? Diabetes alone, the country's health system may be crushed under the weight of the fat diabetics. Right? It's a tragedy. Okay, so during the next election, vote one for the Hemp Party. Now I'll take some questions. You want to start?
Andrew, can you just repeat the question so we can all hear?
Yeah.
Thanks.
Do you want to start?
Yeah, I was going to say...
Maybe you want to stand up, but keep it brief.
Hemp seeds radiated?
No. Okay, the question was the hemp seeds irradiated. Yeah, we did a deal. When we applied to Fazance, right, there was a deal. You could either have whole hemp seeds, which they wanted steam sterilised or irradiated. So when you apply for things, and what we had to learn is there's no point in applying to get to the top of the mountain. We were just going for the hills. The settlement was by having them hulled or shelled, there was no treatment because they weren't viable as a radiation there. But no, definitely not. But they tried to. Yeah, without the shell, yeah. Yeah, the shell has very little nutrition. I mean, unless you're a chook, you don't lose anything by shelling the hemp seed. And I mean, I'm an enthusiast and I'd rather have whole hemp seed than shelled it, you know. There's just very little nutrients in the husk itself. Yeah, I mean, you pick them out of your teeth. I mean, in the early days when we started farming, we had licences in 96, 97, and we just eat them straight out of the field. But then you spend the evening picking the shells out of your teeth, which isn't a hardship, but there's no problem with selling whole seed, right? As long as they're properly... Unfortunately, they're not looking after them as well as they should. They're putting them in bloody plastic bags on the shelf. Ideally, they should be stored under refrigeration for optimal freshness. Right, but that's better than nothing. Yeah.
How much should we eat a day?
As a minimum, okay, just wait a minute. As a minimum, the question was how much hemp seed. It depends what else you're eating too, right? But the minimum amount is, in my opinion, is 40 grams. That's 4 heaped tablespoons for an adult and a little less for a kid. That's not the least. You can have much more than that if you want with benefit. And as a general rule, the more you substitute, say, a hemp seed and berry smoothie for a meal, the better you'll do. There's no doubt about that. Now, just one proviso. Hemp seed has a ratio of omega-3 to omega-6 of 1 to 3, which is ideal for long-term maintenance, right? But most people are well behind that. So what I suggest is that you add some chia seed, which has a 2-to-1 ratio of omega, but it doesn't have the vital cofactors like the vitamin E, the manganese and magnesium and zinc, and the B group vitamins, which are needed to manipulate the omega-3. See, the trouble with the allopaths, they think if you input something, they say, oh, he's had his omega-3, but the cofactors, the other nutrients that are needed to manipulate it are really important. So as a minimum, it's something like 4 heaped tablespoons of hemp seed and at least 1 heaped tablespoon of chia, right, to increase the balance, and you more rapidly correct it. Okay? But don't limit yourself to that. And for Christ's sake, don't mix them up with cow's milk either. Right? I mean, what I suggest people do, say in your breakfast cereal, if that's the way you want to go, make the milk out of hemp seed with a few berries in it. Eh?
That's what I do. I make hemp seed with chia seeds and sunflower.
No, leave the sunflower out because they're high in omega-6. Right? It has no omega-3 and lots of omega-6. What you're trying to do is correct. Yeah, anyway, that's only a small point. Yeah, that's only a small point. What's that?
these seeds.
Yeah, but so what?
We should get going.
Yeah, okay. But just this lady wants a question. And we'll make that last one.
Speaking about thyroid and thyroxine, over the years what I've found was very beneficial for my clients was just a teaspoon in the solution of kelp granules.
Of?
And
Oh, yeah.
And or else those who didn't really want to do smoothies of that, just 1,000 grams of kelp and only in the morning.
Help for
Because
thyroid.
otherwise they could
Yeah.
keep them awake. But it works a treat balancing out hypo and hyper.
Yeah, trouble with the kelp, and I mean, it's a good idea, but remember all the things I said about the Pacific Ocean, a lot of the kelp coming from Japan. I've actually prepared some potassium iodide, and because also you have to eat a lot of kelp. See, it's not only for your thyroid, but you need the extra iodine to displace the fluoride, right? And also, just for interest too, say for instance after Chernobyl, when the thing went off, what did the Russian health officials do? They ran round dosing all their children with iodine. Why did they do that? Because they wanted their thyroids full of iodine so they didn't suck up any strontium or any of the other radionucleons that cause the thyroid cancer after exposure. Now, that's...
I don't mind you staying on, but
Yeah, no, we'll just make one.
I'm just going to interrupt. We've just gone over time, which is normal. I'm happy for you to keep talking, but there'll be a rush for lunch. So if some people want to go and get lunch now, it's good, and we can just keep talking. Okay, does that make sense? Then, nice question.
Yeah.
Do you know the salicylate content of hemp seed? I can't eat too much salicylate. You aware of salicylate?
I have to research that. But no, look, I had a visitor actually that had massive salicylate sensitivities, and we fed her to the eyeballs on hemp seed. She did really well, so my impression is a 0. Hey? Yeah, that's a strong impression, because she used to react like physically to salicylates. And yeah, okay. In fact, no, that's a really interesting question, because when I researched salicylate sensitivity, it's the abnormal production of a leukotriene, a chemical mediator, on exposure to salicylates, right? And I feel that if you normalise your biochemistry, the salicylate overreaction may be diminished, but that's for the future to determine. But I can pretty confidently say it doesn't have salicylates at all. Okay, yeah. Yeah.
They can't hear the question.
We'll talk outside because that's a one-on-one thing. Yeah. Okay. Well, we'll wrap it up now.
Tell them the question. No, you can keep talking. She's got a question.
Oh, right. Okay. So, yes, but we can talk about that. Yeah.
The question was, does he do Skype consulting? Is that true you do? Yeah.
Just because the ACCC told me not to, that's hardly seemed like a good enough reason.
So this lady, you... Can't hear.
Come.
Sorry, no.
Guys, you have to speak up.
What? Can you give him a mic?
We were just wondering if we could speak one-on-one and you as well outside.
Outside,
Oh, yeah, of course.
Yeah,
Who wants to speak one-on-one?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Using the balm, the cannabis balm, does that have a similar effect? I know it's not the same as ingesting.
Using the balm, does it have a similar effect, is the question.
No, she's still going.
Say, rubbing it over a tumour or not using
Okay. Listen, that it's broad because there's all sorts of different things. We've certainly experimented using concentrated resin dabbed on BCCs, right? And just to keep it in perspective, you know, you can't just treat all skin cancers the same. So if someone came to me with a melanoma or something that was suspected of me a melanoma, I wouldn't tell them, oh, just rub this on and see how you go, right? I'd actually send them through a melanoma unit for surgery. But if they turned up with a BCC, a basal cell carcinoma, we've certainly got a moderate amount of experience, most of it positive, with reducing the size of that. In fact, I had a famous patient, she came along crying to the consult saying the doctor says they have to cut my nose off because of this infiltrating BCC. And, you know, I mean, that sounds mild, but having your nose cut off is pretty serious. I mean, sunglasses and all. But we treated it topically and it shrunk it. She still ended up with some plastic surgery, but it was conservative, right? But you have to be aware that the different types of cancers, like the melanoma which spreads from underneath, aren't the same as the superficial spreading ones. And it'd be, I think, at this stage of our knowledge, a bit irresponsible to try and treat a melanoma cancer with topical, right? But very reasonable to treat a BCC, right? The issue of whether topically applied cannabis can have a systemic effect. A couple of the doctors in Florida in the United States treat their epileptics during seizures with cervical massage of cannabis oil mixed with lavender oil, and says it can have a good rescue effect. And they hypothesise that it transfers through the skin into the nerves and translocates up that way. Don't know, but it's plausible. Okay.
Definitely the balm can work on people's headaches, some people's headaches, on your temple even. I've seen that.
So just so you guys know, there's a microphone here and whoever stands here gets preference to a question. So this gentleman.
Okay. Hi Andrew. I want to know a little bit more about THCA and what are the benefits, because I suffer with idiopathic intracranial hypertension and I've been sort of given some advice to try the THCA.
Yeah, okay.
And I don't understand much about that one.
All right. Firstly, there's two sorts of THCA, just to make it more complicated. The first THCA is basically the raw form of cannabis. And in certain conditions, and possibly in many conditions, it has a superior action to THC, like in epilepsy. It may, and more importantly, it doesn't have any deleterious psychotropic effect. Right, so it maintains mental clarity and things like that. Whether it works better in your particular case will be up for you to find out, because there's not the data on it. But if I had my choice, I'd start most people on the acidic form of cannabis and then only progress to decarboxylated cannabis if they wanted a psychotropic effect or if the raw one wasn't effective. Right? The other thing people sometimes do is have the THCA during the day and a THC at night. Right? So you can sort of split it up that way as well. But I can't know, and no one can know. I mean, medicine's still an empirical thing. You know, will it work for this? It depends. Right? I mean, that's not a complete answer to your question, but I don't have it. But my preference is to start with raw cannabis and only proceed to cooked cannabis if the raw one's not getting the result you want, or adding the cooked one at a particular time, usually the evening. Okay? Yeah.
Hi. You mentioned BCCs and melanoma. I was hoping you'd say something on squamous cells.
Okay. The distinction is that basal cell carcinomas have never been known to metastasise, right? Squamous cell cancers do metastasise, right? So then it became melanoma metastasised with, regularity. The SCCs are in the middle, but if you ignore an SCC or treat it ineffectively for too long, there's always a risk it can turn up in the lymph nodes and things like that. So it would be a case-for-case basis. If someone's got an SCC, you prefer to try it at the very earliest stages to see if it's going to respond, as well as a very, very intensive lifestyle program, but don't leave it too long if it's not responding. Do you see? But the issue is we don't want to be left with dabbing something on something while it's busy spreading through your body. It's not enough treatment for that. Whereas if a BCC fails, you can always go back to surgery and not be at risk of a metastatic complication. Do you follow that? That's the issue.
I think, right? Yeah. But a SCC,
squamous cancer.
Yeah, treated with black salve.
Listen, I was hoping to get through a whole weekend without anyone talking about black salve, right? Black salve, I mean, to use the vernacular, just absolutely gives me the shits, right? It's a chemical vesicant. It's got a whole bunch of followers, right? I've seen people treating all sorts of things. It's basically, you might as well just put like a cigarette or a hot iron on it. The problem with black salve, it's a vesicant which makes your skin blister, but it doesn't address the lower issues, the lower layers. All this business of drawing out the cancer, it's really sad. I've only seen disasters with black salve. right? And I'm just not part of my universe. I wish it'd just go away. That's
You should talk to him outside, I reckon. You could catch more info outside for your personal issue.
Yeah, but I mean, I wouldn't rush to black sow, really.
Already did.
Okay.
Yeah, now I know.
Yeah, okay.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, next lady.
Okay, all right. So I have stage 4 cancer. So it's metastasis cancer now.
What sort?
Stage 4 breast. Well, it's come from the breast. So
Breast cancer,
I've
okay.
had I've had 3 cancers. So I was diagnosed in 2004.
Hang on, you've had?
Okay, so I've had 3. I've been through cancer 3 times. This is my 3rd time now. So
Different cancer,
all breast cancer. So 2004 I was diagnosed with breast cancer. Then it came back after 8 years in 2012, and now it's come back and it's metastasis cancer in the bone.
Yeah.
Now, I'm on cancer tablets. They put me on cancer tablets for now. That's what I'm on. Kisqali. It's a Ribo. I've got a photo. I'd like to show you.
I'll have to see it. Okay.
Yeah. And now I want to get onto. Obviously, I'm doing all my research, and I want to use CBD oil. So my question is, does that counteract with the medication that I'm on?
Okay.
Because I want to try
What
something
the
else.
broad question, I'll have to talk to you in a bit more detail,
Okay.
one-to-one,
Great,
but what
thank
the
you.
broad question is what's the interaction between chemotherapy and cannabis? Right? And we've got a fair bit of experience with this, and most of it's strangely positive. The first thing is, I mean, years ago when it was still not even talked about, you could go into a cancer ward, and I spent a lot of time in cancer wards because I had to sort of resuscitate people and stuff like that, and you could see who's using pot, because they're not, right? So it was pretty easy to pick. Since then, it's become pretty clear that there's occasionally a synergism between chemotherapeutic drugs and cannabis. By that I mean it's instead of getting 1 and 1 equals 3, 1 and 1 can equal 4. That means the whole is greater than the sum of the parts, but it depends on the particular agent. We've certainly found in heavy chemo, one of the common side effects is a neuropathic pain that develops, and some of the patients say it's worse than dying. You know, they get this sort of horrible feeling that ants are crawling under their skin or electric shocks, all these neuropathic symptoms. If you take the cannabis of various forms during the chemo, it can block, because of its antioxidant effect presumably, and its neuroprotective effect, block the development of that complication. Right? Also too, chemotherapy, and this one may be different because there's all this new generation of biological treatments which aren't strictly chemotherapeutic. They're not cytotoxic drugs, right? I mean, in the last 10 years, there's been more drugs sort of pushed onto the market, all these bizarre, they call them kinase inhibitors and checkpoint modulators and all these things. The science is just sort of gushing over with these hideously expensive drugs which then have bracket creep. So they develop them for one disease, and before you know it, they're being treated for all these things. But usually, say for instance Keytruda. Have you all heard of Keytruda? It has a dramatic, it's one of these enzyme blocking drugs. It has a dramatic effect in 20% of the people with melanoma. It can just lead to sort of complete regression of even advanced disease, but it kills 20% of the people. And guess which ones the newspapers talk about? Not the 20% that die of bowel perforation or anything like that, only the ones that respond. So it's often a twin-edged sword, the new drugs. But our broad experience is that if the clinical condition warrants chemotherapy, and say for instance you've got a lymphoma that's pressing on your airways and things like that, you know, it's not unreasonable to have one cycle of chemotherapy to get a first kill pass. And, you know, I don't feel like I'm betraying the universe by saying to an occasional patient, I think you're the one that should have a bit of the rat killer, right, whilst we get control of the disease. The usual problem with chemotherapy is they treat the patient to death. They just keep them going until the side effects build up, and then they say, oh, off you go to palliation, right? So it's a sort of a subtle thing, and it's hard to get people that are so advanced in their disease and so backward in their biochemistry. You know how I was talking about eating the right food in the long term? I mean, did you change your diet when you were first diagnosed dramatically? No. And you know that old, now, but it's not too late. You know, believe that, right? If you always do what you've always done, you'll always get what you've always got, right? So yeah, does that answer the question? Partially? There is a place, but it's a one-on-one because you have to look at what the agent is and what its function is, what its metabolic function is.
So if I use both, if I just wanted to do both. Will it counteract with the tablet?
Will it? No, it depends on the agent, but my experience has been there's generally a positive interaction between them, both in terms of reducing its side effects and increasing its effectiveness generally, right? But the individual decision is usually made after a fairly long consultation, but as a rule, right, as a general rule, it's beneficial. Yeah, that's my...
I'd have to say that as a totally untrained hippie, there's a lot of people now I've talked to who are using cannabis while having chemo, and I think it's helped both ways. Probably help them handle the chemo and maybe therefore help the chemo work better in their body and protected them more.
Let me say, this hippie knows more about the subject than Mr. Hunt, right, by a long margin.
Yeah.
Don't there's any doubt.
It's pretty interesting that they can help each other.
Okay, next question.
A question about what was asked earlier about the raw THC versus the decarb. Now you said generally you recommend the raw version first. Does that also apply to the CBD? Because from what I've heard, the raw CBD is generally the best all-rounder, but the decarb is actually better for pain management and it actually crosses the blood-brain barrier versus the raw one doesn't so much. So does the same rule apply there?
Well, it comes down to empiricism, right? Because everyone is quite different. Their endocannabinoid systems are at a different stage of degeneration or repair, right? You can't make blanket rules. I mean, one recommendation doesn't apply to everyone in this room, right? What I said was it's best to start, if you had your choices, I start with the raw CBD dominant cannabis because it's better tolerated. If that doesn't satisfy, you can add some decarb at a later stage and often make it a morning and night thing, right? But there's no place for dogmatism here, right? It's all empirical. I'll give you an example. You know, I've been pushing CBD cannabis for childhood epilepsy. I had a kid that would not respond to anything that we gave him, right? In desperation, I just got some hippie THC pot, put in his smoothie, and he went seizure-free in 3 days. You know, I don't know everything, mate. You have to actually experiment, right? And there's no hard and fast rules. And people who make the rules are somewhat deluded.
So even if we tested someone, it would still be very much impossible to tell what was actually going to work.
You test them by seeing what the response is.
Yeah.
Right? It really is empirical, and you just try this and you try that to find what suits you. Right? I mean, what I've found, the only thing I can say with absolute certainty is that there's no certainty. Right? Hey?
I totally want to back that up. Yeah. From what we've seen, we are so different. And our reactions to cannabis are all so different with so many factors. So we're kind of running on the motto of start low, go slow.
Yep.
And what you said is exactly right. If raw works for you, okay, if it doesn't work, then you might move to decarb, you might move from CBD to THCA, you might move up to THC. So we are all so different. It's fantastic we're different. Imagine everyone was the same. Come on.
Yeah.
Everyone in the room, you have to enjoy who you are. You are a unique creature. Just shapes of dirt, I always think, and then...
What do they say? Be yourself, everyone else is taken.
Yes. And it's, you know, I think it's the big, perhaps, difference to the herbal world, and the pharmaceutical industry tries to nail something that works for everybody. And, you know, it's great that we've still got a mystery, thank God.
So in terms of dosage, just for a general person without specific health needs, what would you say when you say start low?
You just said it all. Start low, go slow.
What is low defined as? Like as in?
Just a very small dose, usually one that doesn't have a clinical effect, like any noticeable effect.
No noticeable...
You're talking to a complete novice.
Yeah, but what do you want to dose with?
So have you ever used cannabis?
No, well, only...
Gee, you must be the only person in Nimbin.
Yeah, I'm not in Nimbin. No, only like 30 years ago made me turn purple. I thought, nah, that's not good.
The old greenhouse, yeah, that's...
So you could get some CBD, you could get some raw CBD even, try that. It will be so subtle, but for some people, it's astonishing it has an effect. I can't believe some people who are... You know, I wouldn't even feel it, but for them it works magic. So it is start low, go slow and experiment. The web is full of knowledge.
Yeah, but there's a factor of 10 times in an effective dose. Like what works for one person you need 10 times, or what's a gross overdose you need 1/10. It's that sort of range, right? I found that in epilepsy. Some of the kids you just have to open a jar and say, here it is, and they're better. Others, you dose them to the eyeballs. It's still a primitive science. I won't pretend it's not, right? But luckily, it's not really even that much of a science. It's empiricism, right? It's like finding the diet that suits you. You eat this, this, and this, and you find what feels best, right?
Okay, thanks.
That's why we reject the pharmaceutical model so harsh, because they're trying to shoehorn everyone into doses, exact doses. They're not that important, the exact dose. It's the right dose that matters.
Yeah, and it's a bit, you say food, it is a bit like food. You have to find the diet that works for you. And if it's the endocannabinoid system, so we've all got one, so everybody needs X amount here or there. I'm impressed and astonished at how different we all react to the plant.
Can I ask about if you using THC, is it like a good idea to have CBD for a synergistic effect?
Well, yes. Are we talking about for what though? Are you talking about for recreational use or for health benefits?
Health benefits,
Okay.
Fibromyalgia. Oh well. Inexplainable
Listen, it's
pain
almost
through your
always a blended mixed cannabis is better tolerated and more effective, right? I think that as a general rule works well. My own personal use, I'm a fairly regular smoker. I used to smoke my own one-to-one and do a lot of farm work and heavy labouring and stuff like that, and it just powers you through your day. It ran out, so a friend gave me some THC like we used to have when we were young. Just didn't like it anymore, right? Different if you may be having sex or something and you want something that's a bit more in your head. But generally for day-to-day stuff, having the CBD on board, it's more balanced.
Yeah.
And it's almost certainly a synergism as well, right? Yeah. I don't think there's any dispute about that.
For pain, for...
Well, they have two rapid and long-term and short-term effects. For instance, the THC might have a more rapid effect against a particular type of pain, but because of the anti-inflammatory effect of the CBD, it has disease-modifying. So you get quick reaction and disease modification as well by having the blends. Some people like to separate them, though. They like to have CBD in the morning, THC dominant at night. That's where the horses for courses come in, because it depends on your lifestyle too.
Yeah, and when you say recreation, I mean, I'm also talking about depression, anxiety, like just, feeling okay, feeling better. Like, do you think the CBD is
well, if you talk about anxiety, people already, and they're cousins. Yeah. People who have got disabling anxiety are often made much worse on THC.
Yeah, true.
Right? Is that everyone's experience? It's certainly
everybody's different.
But anxiety generally responds to a higher CBD load. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Yeah. I would be
experiment.
Yeah, experiment. Yeah.
And then there's the whole world of different strains. People ask me, I've read this strain is what I need for my particular MS or whatever. Because of Prohibition, we're just not that together. But in America, Canada, where they're now down to this strain with this particular mix of cannabinoids is going to work for you, hopefully. But then again, we're all different on top of it. So it's a real individual trial and error thing.
So it's easy to see that THC is having an effect on you, but the CBD is so subtle. It's really hard to know whether it's having an effect or... We need to talk in the microphone.
She's saying, how do you know the CBD is having an effect when its effect may be subtle? It depends. And this is what Michael said it 3 or 4 times now. Everyone's different, right? Yeah. For instance, I was supplying a rather dilute olive oil, CBD dominant oil, for children's epilepsy. And one day I got this sort of phone call from the parent saying, I took a teaspoon, I'm off my chops, I'm hanging off the roof. It's horses for courses, right? And people are just completely... And the programming alters the way they respond to the drug too. If you approach it, this might make my anxiety worse, guess what? It will. All right? And there's so much negative conditioning around cannabis. Yeah. Right? But that's why...
And there's the fear... Then there's the bloody fear of getting busted.
Exactly.
Which is a huge factor I'm finding. And now the driving thing on top of it is really, we're up against it. So listen, I've created chaos a bit, but we didn't have a break because I thought it was worthwhile you're here, picking your brains as much as possible. Dr. John Tay from Plant Med is here, and I've gone past his talking time, but so I reckon anyone who wants to have a break, and if you've sat here from 11, you're legendary, and you should do it now, and maybe, John, within 15 minutes or something, give everyone a chance to come in, because lots of people have come here to hear you. But I love that you've just kept talking and questions, and feel free.
Thanks for
Is that enough? So if you want to talk to Andrew, he's outside. But everyone, have a quick 15 minutes break or 10 minutes, and then Dr. John will be on. Thanks for hanging in.
Thank you.
And thanks, Dr. Pott.